Hey YouTube, it's Eric. In this video, I haven't done a video on my channel on the Jonestown incident, so I think this will be a good one to do. I'm gonna put out the evidence I found in this video that alludes to that Jim Jones was actually a Jesuit when he was running his People's Temple, and that's why ultimately the CIA would have been backing Jim Jones. It's been discovered that the airfield that Jim Jones or the location for his People's Temple wasn't just a random location. Um, I've heard other researchers do this, but I haven't read this book, but it was sourced in the book was Jonestown, a CIA medical experiment. That the land that Jim Jones used in Guyana for to create his socialistic utopian paradise was that land used to be CIA land, and that's why there was a airfield already built when Jim Jones came. So that to me, that was a premeditated decision. That wasn't just random. Um, and like, I don't know if you guys have heard the clip. You can listen to the 45-minute audio clip of Jim Jones during the quote unquote mass suicide at the very end. And you can hear Jim Jones saying, like, get Dwyer out of here, get Dwyer to the East Building. And Richard Dwyer was actually working at the American Embassy in Guyana at this time. So to me, like, Jim Jones saying that was proof that he was compromised by the CIA. Here's a little history though. And don't you find too, guys, it's interesting that the capital city of Guyana is Georgetown, like Georgetown University. I don't think that's a coincidence. You see here, the first Jesuit churches went up in Guyana 150 years ago. 150 years ago, Pope Pius IX, who wrote his encyclical, the Syllabus of Errors, most totalitarian pope of recent times that I can think of. 150 years ago, Pope Pius IX asked the British Jesuits to take responsibility for the church in British Guyana. Father James Etheridge, S.J., was appointed as the first superior in 1857 and was ordained bishop the following year and remained the vicar apostolic of what was then the British Guyana until his death in 1877. In 1860, he saw the need for another church in Georgetown for the spiritual needs of the Portuguese. At Christmas 1861, the Church of the Sacred Heart was opened for midnight mass and was solemnly blessed by the bishops on June 22nd, 1862. It served the Catholic population of Georgetown until a fatal fire on Christmas morning 2004 destroyed the church. It's, the schools beside it. And here's another Jesuit grammar school in Guyana. This Since 1975, it has been coeducational, and only half of its 500 students today are girls. 1976 became a government school, and in 1980, it ceased to be run by the Jesuits. That's right after, like, right when the Jim Jones fiasco ended. That could have just been damage control for them. You see here, the Jesuits have schools in Guyana, so it wasn't a random location, and it wasn't random that Jim Jones was before he moved to Guyana. He was in San Francisco, which is literally a Jesuit stronghold. This Jesuit University of San Francisco, and I'm going to show you some connections that Jim Jones had to this mayor Moscow. That looking into this mayor, this is just another Jesuit connection. I'm going to show you here. This mayor was Jesuit trained. This mayor Moscow, and I think this Jonestown operation could have had a few fake deaths just because there were so many Jesuits involved. I'm going to show you Leo Ryan, the congressman that went down there to Jonestown, who was apparently shot. And the shooting was caught on NBC News, which always makes me a little suspicious. But Congressman Ryan was educated at two Jesuit schools. I'm going to show you that. We see here George Moscone, 37th mayor of San Francisco. This is when Jim Jones's People's Temple cult was blowing up. And you see here Moscone attended St. Bridges, and then he attended St. Ignatius College Prep, right there. Okay, bear that in mind. And you can watch a video clip of George Moscone in 1975 essentially thanking Jim Jones for getting him elected. George Moscone's like, yeah, when Jim Jones gets behind a candidate, he goes all out, and essentially like that. Okay, you see here, this George Moscone was also, let me see here, he was like a staunch liberal, and that's what's the weird thing about this psyop, like this whole operation. Jim Jones was literally like buddies with all the high up Jesuit liberal elite in California, and even like I'm gonna show you, there's a picture of Jim Jones with uh, Mar- uh Jimmy Carter's wife, Marilyn Carter. Jim Jones also went on the plane of the vice president. I forget the guy. I think this guy's name's. Let's see here. Remember the guy's name? This guy here, Walter Mondale. Jim Jones went on Walter Mondale's private plane. Okay. So this Jim Jones guy, he was connected. That's why I think he was a Jesuit because he was so connected with the establishment. Um, what do we see here? Here's here. Moscone was a charming, handsome state legislator. He had electrified San Francisco's progressives with his campaign for City Hall. He was a champion of gays. That's why he knows he's a Jesuit. Women, minorities, tenants, and organized labor. You see here. During the 1975 race between Moscow and Barbarella, the People's Temple went even further to secure victory for its candidate. That's Moscow. On the eve of the election, Jones filled buses with Temple members in Redwood Valley in Los Angeles and shuttled them to San Francisco. Security at the polling place was lax for Election Day, and many non-residents were able to cast their ballots for Moscow, some more than once. Quote, you could have run to 1,200 precincts and voted 1,200 times, said a bitter Bar, Barbagelta later after losing by a whisper of a margin. But he was not the only one who claimed the People's Temple stole the election for Jesuit George Moscow, and People Temple leaders also claimed credit. Okay, so this is a quote from Jim Jones's son, Jim Jones Jr. We loaded up all 13 of our buses with maybe 70 people on each bus, and we had those buses rolling nonstop up and down the coast into San Francisco the day before the election. We're called Jim Jones Jr. He says again, we had people going from the precinct to precinct to vote, so we could have been the force that tipped the election to Moscow. So could we have been the force that tipped the election to Moscow? Absolutely, slam dunk. He only won by 4,000 votes. I'm sorry, but I've got to give my father credit for that. I think he did the right thing. George Moscow was a good person. He wanted the best for San Francisco. Here, Jim Jones made sure that George Moscow never forgot his political debt to the People's Temple. You see here, George, the mayor, like Jim Jones, this like fanatical cultist, actually became the head of the San Francisco city's like housing committee. He became the chairman because Jesuit Moscow promoted him. Okay. Your Temple insiders talked about how Mayor Moscow was one of the politicians under control of the father. He gossiped about the night that the mayor had fallen into the father's hands. Quote, Moscow Moscow was known to be a boozer. He liked to drink at parties, recalled Temple member Hugh Forston, now pastor in Southern California. But one night, there was some sort of temple event that the mayor attended. The next morning, I heard Jones phoned Moscow and told him it was a pleasure to see him the night before and to see him having such a good time. This is from Jim Jones, quote, but I wanted to let you know that the young lady you went with is underage, Jones told him. Now, don't worry, Mayor. We'll take care of you because we know you'll take care of us. That's Jesuit. Like, that's Jesuitry. Okay. So here, the mayor initially resisted the temple's efforts to insert its cult members throughout the city of San Francisco government, and when Jones himself pushed for a high-level appointment, Moscow at first tried to appease him with a harmless post on the Human Rights Commission. But the temple leader insisted on a position that had more clout, and the mayor decided he was in no position to alienate Jones. In October 1976, Moscow announced that he was naming Jones to the San Francisco Housing Authority. So, guys, this fanatical cultist became one of the most powerful men in San Francisco. And the San Francisco Housing Authority oversees the operation of the city's public housing. The agency, the largest landlord in the city, was a notorious maze of corruption, and it provided Jones's organizations with ample opportunity for shady self-dealing. A few months later, Moscow, who we know now was educated at Jesuit St. Ignatius College Prep right here. Okay. Okay. Moscow announced that he was naming Jones to the San Francisco Housing Authority, which oversees the operation. Um, you see here, a few months later, Moscow pulled the strings to promote Jim Jones, making him chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority. Okay. This doesn't make sense, okay? You see, Jones used his position to take possession of public housing units and install temple members in them, and he put other followers on the housing authority payroll. The preacher was building his own power base within the city government. Um, Actually, this is you can read. I'm not going to read this whole article here. This attorney Joseph Freitas was completely under the thumb of Jim Jones, and if you can read that in the article. You see, during the 1976 campaign, Jones wrangled a private meeting with Jimmy Carter's wife. And here's a picture of that. Where was it? Here it is. There's Jim Jones with Marilyn or Rosaline Carter. You can't make this shit up. So Jim Jones wasn't just some Like he wasn't just some cultist. He was deeply connected with some forces behind the government. Here's Jim Jones with the head of the Bar Association in San Francisco, Bob Wallach. Okay, the head of the Bar Association, very powerful organization. Okay, but actually, let me see here. Yeah, actually, I'm going to read you a quote from Albert Manhattan just to prove to you that Jimmy Carter was ultimately controlled by the papacy. So the fact that you're seeing Jim Jones hanging out with Jimmy Carter just proves that Jim Jones was a tool of the papacy. Okay, this is from Murder in the Vatican, Albert Manhattan. Okay, page 225. President Carter had been brainwashed by another Pole, a pillar of the National Security Council, a stubborn anti-communist, anti-Russian, and Catholic who acted as his personal advisor, and that is Zbigniew Brzezinski. And actually, in this Jonestown case, Zbigniew Brzezinski was the guy who called for the medical examiners to leave the bodies rotting in the sun, because Zbigniew Brzezinski didn't want any evidence to be collected from the dead in Jonestown. I'll try pulling up a clip from that. Important though, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was a devout Polish Roman Catholic. At this time, the new Pope John Paul II was Polish, just like Brzezinski, and Zbigniew Brzezinski attended the Jesuit Loyola College High School in Montreal. The Brzezinski was an agent of the Jesuits. Okay, and you see here from documentation, Albert Manhattan said Jimmy Carter was controlled by Brzezinski. You see a picture of Jim Jones with Jimmy Carter's wife. And it just all lines up. So here's a quote from 230 of Aber Manhattan, Murder in the Vatican. President Carter had been briefed about all of this by the intelligent tribunate, the CIA, the National Security Council, by the political section of the Pentagon. They all agreed that the all clear should be given to Pope John Paul II, who was Polish, just like Zbigniew Brzezinski and just like Archbishop Cody in Chicago, who actually had Archbishop Cody. There were many actually FBI investigations into him because he was laundering tons of money. But Archbishop Cody would brag about how he had the richest diocese in America and he had the most Poles in his diocese when Polish Pope John Paul II was coming in. We see here the CIA became overnight the official channel via which the USA briefed the Pope by bypassing Congress, Senate, and the Constitution. President Carter bypassed all four by becoming personally involved in the venture. He did this by charging none other than his own mother. Listen to this. President Jimmy Carter sent his mom to Rome as a diplomat. Yeah, he did this. He did this. Jimmy Carter did this by charging none other than his own mother to give delicate information to the Pope. The trick was carried out when Miss Lillian Carter, the president's mother, was received in private audience with the Pope. While there, she slipped a personal letter to John Paul II written by her son, the president. Yeah. The sneakiness of the operation had been typically appropriate for the CIA knew everything which there had been to know about the new Pope. Every detail of what he did or said, or even of what he intended to do, was noted and carefully indexed for future reference. So you have it right there, like Albert Manhattan say, like Jimmy Carter sent his mom to see the Pope. As Benner Brzezinski was a devout Roman Catholic who was controlling Jimmy Carter, and Brzezinski in this Jonestown case was actually the guy to call out for the medical examiners to not look at the bodies. Okay, and that's why there were so many conflicting reports. That's why at first they said there was 400 bodies dead, and then it went up to 700 bodies, and then it went up to 900 bodies, because this was a complete Jesuit operation. But here you see Jim Jones, the psychotic cultist, with Rosalind Carter. Yeah, and check out this article here. There's more connections in this article. Actually, this is another. I'm gonna show you. Governor Jerry Brown, who is Jesuit educated at Santa Clara, sang the preacher Jim Jones's praises. Congressman John Burton, Phil's brother, lobbied the governor to appoint Jones to the high-profile Board of Regents, which oversaw California's sprawling public university system. I did a video on it, guys. The same California public university system, now headed by Jesuit coadjutor Janet Napolitano, that has over 92 billion assets in their comprehensive annual financial report. And this California university system got $3 billion in U.S. Treasury bills last year. Yeah. So check out that article there. More Jesuit connections to Jim Jones. Let me show you some of these. And actually, this is what I don't know. Alberto Rivera said this when I started looking into him. Alberto Rivera stated that cult leader Jim Jones was a Jesuit under Jesuit secret oath. This webpage is results. So this is spirituallysmart.com. Okay, so this is a picture of an FBI document that was released here, foi.fbi.gov. You see here, there's testimony that Jim Jones often repeated a section of what is alleged to be the Jesuit oath and what is alleged to be a maxim of the Jesuits, which is the ends justify the means. Okay, and this is how the Jesuits do justify all their evil uh, actions. We see here, this redacted, but you see here, someone stated that that's Jim Jones, stated on many occasions that the ends justify the means to any activity. Okay. You see here and here's some endorsements from Catholic Jesuit priests on the People's Temple. Here's Father Alfred Bodeker praising Jim Jones. You realize this is part of the ecumenism agenda. And I'm gonna show you some more quotes that what Jim Jones's operation was an insidious an insidious merging of Marxism and Christianity. That's exactly what he's doing. You can actually listen to the clip of Jim Jones saying that I am a Marxist, and I decided the best way for me to use my Marxism was to infiltrate the church. That's what Jim Jones said. He's a straight up Jesuit. Here's Jim Jones hanging out with Jesuit trained Jerry Brown right here. Jerry Brown is still governor. Okay. I was reading an article that Jerry Brown was like defended Jim Jones in 2015. Some reporters asked if Jerry Brown drank the Kool-Aid, and Jerry Brown was like, "Well, Jonestown was a paradise. They all had a good time. We were all singing together and holding hands." Jerry Brown's a complete Jesuit tool. Here's a picture of Jerry Brown in a Jesuit uniform when he was going for his novitiate at the Sacred Heart. And I found this interesting. When Jim Jones got to Guyana, he initially started preaching at the again, guys, the capital of Guyana is Georgetown, like Georgetown University. Jim Jones starts preaching at Georgetown Catholic Church when he arrives, which to me is not a coincidence. And there's this Jesuit priest was in Guyana the whole time. Here is Father Morrison, and he's actually, I'm gonna show you that Father Morrison was an MI6 agent. He's an MI6 agent slash a Jesuit priest. Okay, here's a quote here. Jones had sent some of his staff members to the commune site, and he had visited and tried to publicize himself by giving a sermon in Guyana's capital city, Georgetown. Members of Jones' staff looked for a place for Jones to preach, and it was a town, and in town was a Catholic church. Jones' staff was aware of the enthusiastic ecumenism of Father Andrew Morrison, S.J., and they asked Morrison if they could use his Sacred Heart Church to give a service without being candid about the nature of Jones's preaching. Father Morrison and his parish council agreed. Jones' appearance at the church was well advertised. Father Morrison was present at the service and was appalled. In the days that followed, Morrison apologized publicly for what he had called the blatant hoax and fraud having taken place in his church. Some people in Georgetown saw Jones as having imported cheap tricks, and the, that tech, Jones was disappointing that techniques that had worked in India and California had not worked in Georgetown, Guyana, and Jones wondered whether he was losing his touch. Okay, so this while Jim Jones was in Guyana, you have this Reverend Father Andrew Morrison who's stationed there. Okay, you see here, Father Morrison was to grow immensely tall and successfully to study accountancy, to become a Jesuit, and to be approached by MI6 to train as a saboteur. He would edit a newspaper and be hailed of the continent wide as a champion of press freedom. This guy has been championed worldwide as uh, a warrior of freedom and press freedom, which is hilarious. He's a Jesuit. You see Reverend Andrew Morrison selling his Catholic propaganda in People's Temple. This guy published a book too, I think called like the struggle for freedom in Guyana, and it's hard to get, but here's a quote from it here. People's Temple had established a commune in the Northwest District near the Venezuelan border in 1974. And again, I said this earlier in the video, but it wasn't just a random location that the People's Temple chose. It was actually a CIA training facility. The CIA was training mercenary forces to fight in black mercenaries to fight in Angola and Brazil. It wasn't just some random, and that's why like when Jim Jones went to Jonestown, there was already a airfield built, like ready for them. Okay. Here, little is known about them in Guyana, except that this is from a Jesuit, except that they had come from the United States, an MI6 Jesuit, right? They had come from the United States to establish an agricultural mission in the jungle to help with the government's quote grow more food campaign. This was the story put out in glowing terms by the government-controlled press. That's from a Jesuit. He's saying that this was the story put out by the government-controlled press. You see, as you can see from the above quotes, that this Jesuit didn't like the People's Temple from the start. You see, the Jesuits had been busy trying to overthrow the current government because they had broken away from Britain in 1966. And remember, this Jesuit, Father Morrison, was an English MI6 agent. Okay. Let me show you some more just Jesuit connection. Yeah, here's some more what Alberto Rivera said. Alberto Rivera said, I think this was in his Godfather's comic, the Jonestown Massacre was well planned as a military, religious, political event. The truth behind this is well hidden. Um, he says you can find evidence of this in Dr. Better's audio tape. You see here, Jim Jones was a student of Father Divine, who was another cult leader at this time. Father Divine was a demon possessed preacher deep into the occult. Jones was a powerful warlock and a well trained Jesuit. Jones was into the ecumenical and charismatic work. Well, you just read Jim Jones was into the ecumenism of Father Andrew Morrison, a Jesuit MI6 agent who was stationed in Guyana. At the time, Jim Jones moved his operation down there. Okay. I think they could have been doing some MK Ultra stuff too, ultimately down there. I think it was ultimately an experiment. But here, Jones went into the ecumenical and charismatic work. He preached the love gospel. Most of his followers were Roman Catholic and from Roman Catholic backgrounds. Others were unsaved Protestants from a variety of denominations. In 1953, he established the Christian Assembly of God Church. In 1962, he became a missionary to Brazil, associated with the Christian Assembly of God, which he founded. And guys, there's more research into out there, but there's research that Jim Jones was actually doing missions for the CIA in Brazil and Cuba, going all the way back to the late 50s. So he's been a CIA asset, and like a good Jesuit, Jim Jones ordered his followers to call him Father and pray to him in 1973. Here, isn't it strange that an unimportant leader of a small church would attract top figures from political and religious worlds alike? Miss Rosalind Carter, representing the President of the USA, talked to Jim Jones. Governor Jerry Brown, who's Jesuit trained. Mayor Moscow to San Francisco, who is Jesuit trained. Actually, Mayor Moscow to say that's how a lot of Jim Jones and Moscow they would find a lot of vulnerable people to recruit into this cult because you can find this in the article I linked in the description. Jim Jones and Moscow they made a deal where members of the People's Temple cult got jobs through the City of San Francisco Welfare Department, and through the Welfare Department, people working in the Welfare Department that were part of the People's Temple did mass recruiting to tons of people on the streets of San Francisco, and usually they were the most vulnerable people. A lot of these people they would recruit were drug addicts, they came from broken homes. Um, so like it's a black magic exploitation ring. You see here, this is Alberto Rivera. Alberto Rivera. I believe all this was part of the setup for the massacre to receive worldwide coverage. Jim Jones planned and prepared under instructions from Rome to sacrifice his flock to fulfill his Jesuit oath. When it was over, the world was in shock. Now, guys, Jim Jones is literally saying, you can hear him say, "How was I going to display my Marxism?" You can hear this on a quote. Jim Jones said, "I'm going to preach my Marxism by infiltrating the church." And actually, here's a quote from Jim Jones saying here that his flock, off the record, I don't believe in any loving God. This is from Jim Jones here. I don't believe in any loving God. No, no, guys. Joseph Stalin was also an atheist, and Joseph Stalin was educated at the Jesuit Tiflis Seminary in Georgia. Okay, this is from Jim Jones. Off the record, I don't believe in any loving God. Our people, I would say, are 99% atheists. We think Jesus Christ was a swinger. Yeah, he taught some good things as feeding the hungry, clothing the naked. That's Marxism. He's trying to harmonize the tenets of Christ with the tenets of Lenin. And I'll show you some more. Context with that. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with the denomination. It's called the Disciples of Christ. It includes the FBI director Clarence Cayley, former President Lyndon Baines Johnson, Jesuit trained at Georgetown, I think, Senator Walter Monsdale, to give you some background of it. Okay. There's a Jim Jones claim that all these high political figures right here are connected to his operation. Yeah. You see here, here's a quote saying that Jones said that he was working for the government, the CIA people who were using the People's Temple members as guinea pigs in a mind control experiment. That if this worked, it would later be used elsewhere on a massive scale after the terrible depression came on those who would not do what the government ordered them to do. Yeah. That's what I think Jonestown ultimately is. Just pulling up my phone here. Give me a second. Okay. Here's some more links here. Okay, to the top. Yeah, so I checked out. These are really good. This is well researched. These are well researched articles. You see here, guys. Why was a cult leader like Jim Jones, like a crazy fanatic cult leader, a self-proclaiming socialist, Marxist cult leader? Jim Jones. You can actually hear Jim Jones saying that our spiritual mother is the Soviet Union. He was a complete Marxist. He was using. He was trying to blend, or he was trying to harmonize the tenets of Marxism with the tenets of Christianity. Monsieur Jones enjoyed public support and contact with some of the highest level politicians in the United States. For example, in the heat of the 1976 presidential campaign, Jones met with vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale on his campaign plane. Here's a picture of Jones with Rosalind Carter. Okay. You see Governor Jerry Brown, who's Jesuit educated, Lieutenant Governor Marilyn Dimely, and Assemblyman Willie Brown, among others, attended a large testimonial dinner in Jim Jones' honor in September 1976. At that dinner, Willie Brown referred to Jones as a quote, a combination of Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, Albert Einstein, and Chairman Mao, end quote. Take that. Here you got a Democratic you got Willie Brown, a Democratic assemblyman, refers to Jim Jones as a mix of Martin Luther King, Chairman Mao, Albert Einstein, and Angela Davis. Both Assemblyman Willie Brown and Jesuit-trained Jerry Brown attended temple services. And actually, this proves here that the coroner from Guyana like proved that it wasn't a suicide. Um, the doctor Motudo was the Guyanese doctor on the scene quickly and testified that almost all the dead had ejection marks on their shoulder blades or were shot or strangled. There was no evidence of mass suicide, but mass murder. And check out these. These are really good videos here that this guy put together. Okay. And the Jonestown was built up right to the Waco. It was built up to the Oklahoma City bombings, ultimately to the and to 9/11. Okay, this guy was close to Jim Jones here. Dan Mitrione was a CIA agent. Okay, let me see here. So 1980, a column by respected investigative reporter Jack Anderson was published under the title CIA Involved in Jonestown Massacre. This is the first allegation of the CIA involvement in the Jonestown incident. According to Anderson, both Richard Dwyer and Jim Jones had ties to the CIA, and Dwyer's ties dating back to at least 1959. When quizzed directly about this alleged CIA involvement, Dwyer responded, "No comment." End quote. Dwyer was a CIA agent. Here's a picture of Richard Dwyer. At one point on the sound recording made during the mass suicide, Jones's own voice commands, quote, "Take Dwyer down to the East House," end quote. And a short time later, Jones says, quote, "Get Dwyer out of here before something happens to him," end quote. This is considered by some to be evidence that Richard Dwyer, a U.S. embassy official, was really a CIA operative. Okay. Um, And even I'm gonna go into this Paul Ryan, this Leo Ryan shooting, not Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan actually 3 weeks ago said that America needs to become Catholic. You can look that up. Richard Dwyer though, right when Leo Ryan supposedly assassinated, Richard Dwyer just um, like pulls away from him miraculously. Then like the shooting team comes out. Um, Here's a picture of Richard Dwyer with Jim Jones. Okay. Um, I'm not gonna go through this whole article because it would take too long. Okay, I just want to find some pictures. This guy here, like in this Larry Layton, who supposedly shot Congressman Ryan, had a dad that worked in the Central Intelligence Agency and had relatives in the U.S. Army, and he's been now paroled. This Larry Layton guy, and I think the assassination of Congressman Ryan could have been set up. And you look at this here, Congressman Leo Ryan is an interesting aspect to this case. Everyone says that he was the victim. They believe the CIA set him up because he was working on the amendment that would restrict the operations of the CIA called the Hugh Ryan's Act. Here's here. I agree with the author here. I think it's a possibility that he was in on the whole thing. Um, just to clarify this, I think they may have faked his death and that he could have lived out the rest of his life under assumed name in South America or somewhere else. I'm saying this is a possibility. Important to know, guys, like Operation Paperclip brought tons of Nazis and Ustashi uh, fascists into America, and they got new names and became American citizens. Just some off the top of my head: Knight of Malta, Reinhard Gehlen came to America. Uh, what's the guy's name? The head of the rocket program. Uh, I can't think of the guy's name right now. But lots of Nazi scientists came over. Okay. That was in paperclip. Okay. You see here, Leo Ryan was Jesuit trained. He graduated from Campion Jesuit High School in the Prairie du Chien. You see here, Leo Ryan also graduated from Creighton University, which is Jesuit. Oh, I lost it here. Um, Actually, apparently this George Philip Blakey, if you look more into Jonestown, he was a alleged CIA agent who was down on the compound the whole time. George Philip Blakey is sourced as the man who actually put down the down payment for the Jonestown facility. Oh, I'd lost that link. Okay. Leo Ryan was Jesuit trained. Okay, and Leo Ryan, November 3rd, 1977, Ryan read into the United States Congressional Record a testimony by John Gordon Clark about the health hazards connected with destructive cults. And this is big because this is what ultimately Jonestown and like Waco and all these what these psychological operations accomplished. Essentially, it creates a how can I just explain this? It creates a standard now where if you're now like moving away from the mainstream Catholic Church's spirituality, you're going to be ostracized as an extremist and as a cult member, and you're going to be called a dangerous cult if you don't blindly submit to the Jesuits. Okay, that's what this whole thing was about. Okay, and there's no coincidence that Jerry Brown, Jesuit governor of California, was so close to Jim Jones. Jesuit Jerry Brown attended People's Temple meetings. Okay. Now you see your Jesuit trained Leo Ryan, who was supposedly assassinated. There's been established the Leo Ryan Education Foundation in honor of Congressman Leo Ryan. So you just see how literally this Jonestown thing. So Leo Ryan, the congressman who goes down there, okay, is Jesuit trained. You have the mayor of San Francisco, who Jim Jones helped gets into office, and this mayor helped Jim Jones expand his People's Temple operation in San Francisco. He's Jesuit trained. You have Jesuit trained Jerry Brown hanging out with Jim Jones. You have Dianne Feinstein, a Roman Catholic Marxist gun grabber who hangs out with Jim Jones. All these Roman Catholics are close to Jim Jones. I already told you, Jimmy Carter's wife was had a private meeting with Jim Jones, and this is the same Jimmy Carter who sent his own mom as a diplomat to the Pope, and the same Jimmy Carter that was completely controlled by the Polish Roman Catholic Zbigniew Brzezinski, and the same Brzezinski, I'm pretty sure, is Zbigniew Brzezinski ordered in Jonestown. He ordered for the bodies not to be examined. Okay, you see, Zbigniew Brzezinski mentioned Reverend Jim Jones in sermon. No way. Zbigniew. This is a complete Jesuit controlled operation. Yeah. Oh, Jerry Brown. Oh yeah, you're in California, aren't you, Casey? Yeah, honestly, like the whole California establishment that's still in power was like completely promoting Jim Jones in the 70s, this massive uh mass murdering cultist. I recommend check out this video, guys. I'm gonna link this in the description. But this is huge. If Zbigniew Brzezinski brings up Jim Jones in a sermon, that is absolutely huge. Because Brzezinski was the head of the National Security Council at this time, a fanatical Catholic educated at Loyola High School, Jesuit High School in Montreal. Yeah. Okay, you can see here. Here's a. I'll put this link in the article too. Uh, this is more information on Brzezinski. Let me tell you that this Jonestown. Oh, okay, oh, you're okay. We're see if there's anything else I want to put up here. I'm gonna say the evidence is overwhelming that Jim Jones was a Jesuit. And I think here's this FBI file here. Jim Jones states that the ends justify the means. Jim Jones, like he Actually, I'm gonna show you this. So this is from Aber Manhattan's The Vatican Moscow Alliance. If you watch the Jim Jones death tape, you can hear Jim Jones saying that, we're dying a revolutionary death for communism and Marxism and socialism. Okay, Jim Jones, you can find the clip. I linked in the description. But Jim Jones was a self-permitted atheist and communist who said that the best way to preach his Marxism was to infiltrate the church. Okay, so this is just, I'm going to read a page from Aber Manhattan's book, Vatican, Washington, Moscow Alliance. This to show you that this hyperized Marxism becoming in harmony with Christianity was, it has been an agenda of the Catholic Church for some time. So Jim Jones was just part of radicalizing the masses. Yeah, making them revolutionaries. You see here, the preaching of Marxist revolutionary tenets, whether during the Vatican Moscow Alliance or the Vatican Washington Alliance, was not confined to mere theoretical sponsorship. They trespassed into the practical field in most Latin American lands. Guyana was in Latin America. Their priests, missionaries, Jesuits, even nuns masterminded invasion by scatterers on private and state-owned lands and incited peasants to active violence from El Salvador to the Amazonia in Brazil. Many incidents resulted in grave economic disruptions, severe physical fights, and even deaths. Catholic lay and ecclesiastical agitators advocated violence. That's what Jim Jones did, using even religious images as Archbishop Romero had done before them. A typical passage is found in one of Romero's pastoral letters, in which he describes the scene on Mount Tabor when Jesus was transfigured. Quote, the five people with Jesus, Romero had commented, Moses, Elias, Peter, and James and John, were all men of violent disposition, end quote. These agitators, along with Romero, explained the church as teaching that, quote, when there's a situation of permanent and organized injustice, then the situation itself is violence. End quote. The sponsoring of such radicalism, again, Jim Jones was a Vatican Democratic Party CIA sponsored radicalist, spelled the sure fostering of a massive social revolution, particularly in a continent where the population is composed of largely of landless peasants with a rapidly escalating birth rate. In Brazil alone, for instance, they had already increased by over 30 million in the last 10 years. The total population of Latin America, in fact, has been growing so fast that by the year 2000 it will harbor more than half of the total Catholic believers in the entire world, which makes the Catholic Church the undisputed giant of the continent. In numerical terms, it means that Latin America will then have more Catholics than Africa, Asia, and the whole of Europe and the U.S. put together. Okay, and then not a coincidence that Jim Jones, when he first came to Guyana, was preaching at the Georgetown Catholic Church. Okay. The implications for the U.S. having such a Roman Catholic giant next door are portentous, and that's why Nancy Pelosi and the same Democrats that were in control with Jim Jones back in the 70s have the California border and the southern borders wide open so the mass of Roman Catholics from Mexico can flood into the USA. Okay. When these hundreds of millions of desperately poor are continued to be fed by the Catholic neo-Marxism, again, Jim Jones literally said he was a Marxist. Jim Jones said, I'm going to infiltrate the church to preach my Marxism. Okay. The desperately poor are continuing to be fed by Catholic neo-Marxism, then the portents of inevitable disasters are fearful indeed, since the liberation theology has become irreversible. Its spirit of social disruption has come to stay independently of the ideological advantages of the Vatican-Washington alliance. Because of its irreversibility, it will operate even more effectively in the future, independent of old or new popes. It cannot be otherwise, since liberation theology has acknowledged that Marxism and the church have a lot in common. That's what Jim Jones' whole operation was about, I think. The recent popes have all accepted this proposition, whereas, and guys, Karl Marx was educated for 5 years at a Jesuit seminary in Germany. The recent popes have all accepted this proposition that whereas Marxism says that history is a process of the masses struggling towards universal communism. Again, guys, Jim Jones literally in his the suicide tapes, Jim Jones said like we're dying for a revolution in communism. Okay, Christianity likewise affirms that history is a process of the masses struggling towards the kingdom of heaven. This belief carries an irresistible appeal to the starving millions of Latin America, hence their ready acceptance of neo-Marxist Catholicism. And that's why Jim Jones was essentially preying on like starving millions in America and San Francisco through the welfare department on the city of San Francisco. He employed a bunch of his People's Temple's members, and the People's Temple members would go out onto the streets of San Francisco and recruiting mostly mentally unstable people to join this cult. Okay, Jim Jones would go out on buses to different cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Fresno. He'd literally take out tens of buses full of cult members and go out and recruit other cult members to join his Marxist cult that was sponsored by the CIA and the Jesuits. Okay, and that's why like there was a report that there were so many drugs down in the Jonestown compound, like there was enough Thorazine to supply the city of Georgetown for over a year, and the city of Georgetown had a population of like 100,000, and the population of Jonestown was like 1,000. Like it was crazy the shit that was going on down there too. You see, hence their ready acceptance of neo-Marxist Catholicism, and eventually a Marxist Vatican, Pope Francis, Jesuit, and finally of a Marxist-orientated Pope. Okay, the acceptance of a neo-Marxist Catholicism spells the acceptance of a Catholic-sponsored revolution. That's exactly what Jim Jones's agenda was, and that's why he had all these Catholic Democrat politicians like Jerry Jones, or not Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones from the Cowboys' son actually goes to Georgetown. But Jerry Brown. That's why you guys like Jerry Brown going to People's Temple meetings and sponsoring Jim Jones. Yeah, the Latin American Catholic masses will carry out with the blessing of their church by persuasion if possible and by force if necessary. Well, you see, but that they will use force. The Jim Jones case is proof that they will use force to spread this communistic Catholic propaganda. Catholic priests already committed to such proposition have become and are and still continue to be the spokesman for Catholic Marxist guerrillas. That's essentially what the People's Temple was: Catholic Marxist guerrillas. Many are actively engaged in guerrilla combat themselves. When reapproached for their radicalism, they reply with gospel quotations harmonized with Marx. And this is exactly what Jim Jones said. Woe unto ye rich. Is that not also what Das Kapital has said? End quote. Quote, he has chosen me to set free the oppressed, end quote, is the reply of the committed guerrilla priests. Quote, he fills the hungry with good things and leaves the rich with nothing. This neo-Catholic Marxism goes even further, however, promoting the abolition of private property. Guys, you know what Jim Jones did when you joined his cult? He would say, you have to give all of your property over to me. All of your income, like all of your social security information. Okay. And I saw that's why in the archives, Jim Jones actually said, like, we're running like kind of our own legal jurisdiction down here. Okay. Justified. So the giving up of private property is justified by the proposition that all land is owned by God. And guys, the Pope is God. Okay, the church is God, the Catholic Church. The kingdom of God, according to this credence, is the establishment on this earth of a just society. That's exactly what Jim Jones was saying. Jim Jones is all about, oh, we need to promote a just society to escape from this inhumane world with, quote, all goods in common like that of the early Christians. Okay. You see, the spirit of these biblical Marxist Leninist orientated quotations has already impregnated the whole fabric of the Latin American church. From Tierra del Fuego to the borders of the U.S., scattered all along the continent, there are undetermined battalions of missionaries, priests, nuns, lay workers, preaching and practicing a combination of the tenets of liberation theology and the neo-Marxism, Marxism, Catholicism of Pope John Paul II. And guys, while Pope John Paul II was just elected Pope when the Jonestown massacre went down, and you have Polish Catholic Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's the head of the United States National Security Council, who's essentially controlling Jimmy Carter. And Zbigniew Brzezinski orders that no medical examination of the bodies take place. And that's why the bodies were out there for days rotting in the heat of Guyana. So the fingerprints would be melted off. That was Brzezinski, okay? Who did that. I just want to show you this whole I think this the whole Jonestown thing was a Jesuit operation. I think this picture here is the most damning. Right here, there's lots of damning pictures of Jim Jones with high-level political figures, but Jesuit trained Jerry Brown is still the governor. He went from governor of California in the 70s to the attorney general, back to the governor. Jerry Brown is pushing the Pope's climate change agenda really hard right now. I saw Jerry Brown he even spoke in Rome in 2015. Yeah. So let's check this out. And even the Jesuit that was this MI6 Jesuit agent that was in Guyana at the time of Jim Jones, Andrew Morrison. Here's a picture of like a Jesuit burial, like a Jesuit memorial for this Jesuit priest that was martyred down in Guyana. And you see here Peter Hans Clovenbach right there. This is not to me. It's not a coincidence, guys. This was nothing but trying to merge the tenets of communism with Catholicism. And it was ultimately an experiment. I think they were doing some MK Ultra type of stuff down there too. And there's tons of you can watch. I've seen videos out there. There's guys who go into Jim Jones's connection with the CIA more in detail than I have, but it wasn't just a piece of it wasn't a random landing strip out in Guyana that Jim Jones decided to go to. It was a CIA training base. As Jim Jones went to the Catholic Church when he first came to Guyana. Even Leo Ryan, the congressman who supposedly goes down there to investigate, is a Jesuit or trained by two Jesuit schools. Um, it just to me, it was a weird operation, but the Jesuits are all over it. Like the mayor of San Francisco. So I think I'm gonna call it there. But if there's any more information that I missed, like leave it in the comments. But I think the evidence is there that Jim Jones was a Jesuit, and I think Alberto Rivera was right. If he wasn't a Jesuit, he wouldn't have been able to become so powerful and influential within the elite of the Democratic Party in the 1970s. There's no way Jim Jones would have had a private meeting with Rosalind Carter if he wasn't a Jesuit or like a Knight of Malta or something like that. And you can find the clips. Like I'm gonna say this before I go. Jim Jones literally says like I'm going to infiltrate the church with my Marxism. He says over and over again, I am a communist. I'm an atheist. Like my mother is the Soviet Union. The Jesuits and the Soviet Union were working hand in hand together the entire pontificate of Pope Paul VI and Pope John the 23rd. That was the beginning of the Washington Moscow alliance. Okay, and I recommend you read this book here of Aber Manhattan. You know, see, I think the Jim Jones, it was an MK Ultra thing too, but I think the real agenda of Jonestown was the gradual radicalization of the Catholic masses and turning them into Marxists. And it's sad, like you can hear in the death tape, you hear this one lady saying, like, I'm gonna willingly give up my life for the revolution of communism. Like it's sad, like they manipulated thousands of people, but like this is just one small incident. Like every single day, there are millions of Catholics and Protestants even who are being poisoned by this neo-Marxist Rome doctrine. But yeah, that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and Nam Nas. Take care.